Echo climbed back up through the ventilation shaft as quickly as she could, trying to outrun the waters that were rising below her. Finally, just when she thought she could climb no more, she reached the top and emerged, blinking into daylight and fresh sea air. She hauled herself out and collapsed, panting on the rocks, by the feet of a startled thunder shark, whom she identified as Stanley. Water streamed from her hair and clothes, and Gilbert climbed out of her pocket, shaking droplets from his scales. "She's back," he exclaimed. "Oi, boss, she's back." He turned to Echo. "You got it? You better add." "She is?" Old Gus's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. But his familiar glare soon returned. "You're late," he snarled, storming across the rocks towards Echo. "Hand it over." A flicker of fear ran through her as she unfastened the straps of her soaking knapsack. Would all that water have ruined the map? But as she reached inside, she realized that by some miracle the paper was only damp. She paused as she smoothed out the crumpled parchment, trying to take in every detail of the spidery outlines. But she didn't recognize any of the names, and the coastlines were unfamiliar too. She couldn't just hand it over to old Gus, not just like that. She should be taking it to Lil. Then the black sky wolves could find the treasure. But she realized with a sinking heart that she had no choice. If she didn't give it to old Gus, Horace would die a horrible death. Guilt weighed heavily in her stomach. No, she would have to give it up. But somehow she couldn't quite bring herself to do it. Before she had a chance to ponder any further, old Gus snatched the parchment paper from her hand. He studied the map. "Tarracona Canyon, eh?" he muttered to himself. "Right in the heart of Dragonlands. Should have known." He shoved the parchment into his jerkin and clapped his large hands together, a mad glint in his eye. "Right, lads and lasses," he bellowed. "Full steam ahead to Tarracona Canyon. The race is on." He turned on his heel and marched back to the ship, the other sky pirates hurrying after him. "Hey, wait a minute," shouted Echo. "Haven't you forgotten something?" Old Gus waved his hand at her without looking back. Yes, you're free to go. But what about Horace?" "Horace?" "My friend. You said if I brought you the map, you'd let him go." "Ah, we've had a slight change of plan." Old Gus chuckled cruelly. "Turns out young Horace is a useful crew member, good at reading. We'll keep him." Keeping him? Echo felt dizzy. How could she have been so stupid? She trusted a pirate, and the leader of the dreaded Thundersharks at that. She felt sick. She should have known he wouldn't keep his word. "But you can't. You promised," she shouted. "I think you'll find I can do whatever I like." Echo's shock turned to rage, and she whipped Stinger from her boot, brandishing it at him with one shaking hand. "I won't let you take him." Old Gus smiled a horrible smile. "Really? I'll fight you." Echo shook the little sword at him again. "Oh, will you?" In one swift movement, old Gus whipped his cutlass from its scabbard and flicked Stinger out of Echo's hand. It arched through the air and landed on the rocks with a clang. Echo stumbled sideways, lost her balance, and fell backwards, skinning both palms and landing on her bottom with a thud. Old Gus marched off, laughing, towards Obsidian. "Fire up the engines, lads," he yelled over his shoulder as he stomped up the gangplank. "You can't take him," Echo shouted after him. But he didn't turn around, and neither did any of the other Thundersharks, who were racing off here and there, frantically readying Obsidian for takeoff. Echo was still sprawled on the rocks, sobbing, when the engines roared and the Thundersharks surged into the air in a cloud full of foul-smelling smoke. Off they soared, far into the distance, taking the map and Horace with them. And now we're up to chapter 18. Echo watched helplessly as Obsidian got smaller and smaller, until finally the ship shrank to a dot on the horizon and disappeared. Panic washed over her as she glanced around the deserted island. Stranded. And what would happen to Horace? things were getting worse and worse. He might be safe from the shark tank for the moment, but how would she ever get him back? "Oh, what are we going to do?" she wailed. Gilbert clambered up onto her shoulder and touched her cheek gently with his snout in the way that said, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out." "I guess we will," she said, smiling weakly and tickling his crest. But inside, Echo had no idea how she'd manage it. There was no way off the island. Across the waves, she could see the stone buildings of Aqua Libra. But even though Bulkhead had taught her to swim in the last few weeks at Sleepy Palms, she knew it was much too far for her to manage. The ventilation shaft that led back to the library was still full of gurgling water, so that route was out too. Echo sighed and sat down on the rocks, her head in her hands. She was trapped, at least until the tide went out. She felt a nudge to her shoulder and looked up to find Gilbert flashing his crest. "What is it?" she said. She followed the little lizard's gaze to a small black shape on the horizon. She squinted at it. Another airship. Of course, the other Sky Pirates clans must have worked out the clue by now. Her heart lifted for a moment. Could it be the Scarlet Margaret? Had Lil solved the first part of the clue too? Echo continued to watch as the airship approached. But as it got closer, she realized with a sinking heart that it wasn't the Scarlet Margaret at all. It was another ship, smaller and sleeker, with a green silk balloon, and, at its prow, a flag with a skull and crossbones entwined with snakes. Echo racked her brains. Which of the Sky Pirates factions had the snake emblem? The scurvy sea snakes? That was it. She watched as the ship approached the entrance to the Aqua Libra vaults. Several hundred meters away, across the water, she heard its engines hum as it slowed to a hover, before flying over to the harbor and weighing anchor near the sailing boats. After a few moments, a hatch on the side of the ship popped open and a metal gangplank slithered out. Echo stared as the flame-haired figure of Miranda Vosberg stepped out. She wore high-heeled green boots, dark breeches, a frilly white skirt, and an emerald cape that billowed in the salty air. Echo squinted in the midday sun. There was a brilliant green something round Vosberg's neck as well. A scarf, perhaps? Although Echo couldn't make it out exactly. Echo reached for her knapsack and drew out Horace's spyglass. When she focused on Vosberg, she drew back in surprise. The scarf wasn't a scarf, but a vivid green snake, its head swaying from left to right and its tongue a flicker. Vosberg strode over to the blue lacquered library entrance, and Echo saw her rap sharply on it with her knuckles, but Echo knew there would be no answer. Where did Gurrend even go at high tide? After waiting for a few minutes, Vosberg stamped her foot impatiently. Echo saw her take out her own spyglass from the pocket of her breeches and scan round the bay. Too late. She realized Vosberg was going to see her, and for one brief moment, they were staring down their spyglasses at each other. Echo gasped and dropped the spyglass. It fell with a clang and rolled along the rocks. Echo glanced around for somewhere to hide, but there was nowhere. She dropped to the ground, trying to make herself as small as possible. When she looked up, Vosberg was still looking through the spyglass across the water, staring straight at her. Echo watched as Miranda Vosberg disappeared back into her ship. There was a distant click, click, click as the gangplank coiled up, and a hiss clunk as the hatch closed behind it. Echo heard the engines fire and tried to hold down the fear that swelled in her stomach as the ship turned its nose towards her and approached the little island. Not another Sky Pirate clan to deal with. What if the scurvy sea snakes were even worse than the thunder sharks? Gilbert nudged her shoulder. "Perhaps she'll help us," Echo said, her voice wobbling. "She's part of the Seven Skis Alliance after all." Gilbert bobbed his head, but his scales were pale, and as the ship weighed anchor and the hatch hissed open, he scrambled into her knapsack and hid. As Miranda Vosburgh stalked towards her, Echo pushed her shoulders back and tried to make herself as tall and sky-piratey as she could be, although she couldn't quite manage to stop her legs from trembling. Miranda stopped in front of Echo and smiled. "And what have we here?" she said, putting her hands on her hips. She tapped one green fingernail onto her chin. "A girl all alone on an island? But how did you get to the island? Are you alone?" Echo dipped her head and said nothing. She probably couldn't trust this Vosburgh woman any more than she could trust old Gus. But what other choice did she have? She looked up to find Vosburgh regarding her, a faint smile still on her pink gloss lips. The snake around her neck flicked its tongue at Echo. Miranda reached into her cloak and pulled out a green velvet pouch, retrieved a little white sweet and put it in her mouth. The sweet smell of peppermint drifted towards Echo and her mouth watered. Miranda arched one elegant eyebrow. "Hungry?" She offered the bag to Echo. Echo licked her lips, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten anything but a few jelly beans for almost a whole day. One sweet wouldn't hurt, would it? After all, Miranda had eaten one. "Thanks," she said, her voice coming out in a croak. She took one of the smooth white pebbles and put it onto her tongue. "So, what happened?" asked Miranda, casually tossing a mint to her snake, which caught it with one deft snap of its jaws. They left me here," said Echo, sucking her mint. The sweet, sugary pastel made her bones flood with warmth and her tongue suddenly feel looser. She knew she wouldn't tell Miranda too much, but how else could she explain it? Who did? The Thunder Sharks. "You're a Thunder Shark? Gosh, I shall have to be careful." Miranda pressed her green lacquered nails to her lips, and her eyes sparkled with laughter. "No," Echo felt her cheeks burning. "Good, I'm glad to hear it." Miranda leaned forward and whispered theoretically, "Don't tell anyone, but I think the Thunder Sharks are a bunch of brutes. Imagine, dumping you here, just a little girl." She reached forward and stroked a lock of Echo's hair. Echo shrank back. "I'm not a little girl, I'm a sky pirate." "But I thought you weren't a Thunder Shark." A frown creased Miranda's brow. "I'm a black sky wolf." The words spilled from Echo's lips before she could stop them. Miranda's eyes became sharp with recognition. "Don't tell me, you're Lil's girl." "No, don't lie to me," Miranda nodded slowly as she looked Echo up and down. "I can see it. You're just like her." Echo swallowed, torn between cursing herself for giving too much away and feeling proud that she looked so much like her mother. Miranda recovered herself and smiled again. "So what are you doing out here, young black skywolf? Having adventures?" Echo looked into Miranda's brilliant green eyes, still unsure whether she could trust her. But what choice did she have? If she wanted to rescue Horace, she was just going to have to persuade Miranda to help. She seemed friendly after all. Echo swallowed the rest of her peppermint and began to explain. And that's all we're reading for today. We'll see you for the next chapter.